thank you very much for coming. I have to say sometimes these welcomes have a slightly hollow ring with them because every conference starts with a welcome. But I do want to say that we are enormously grateful to you for coming today. There is a big job to be done, and you are all needed. We are all of us activists. We all of us have campaigns. All of those campaigns involve a battle, and they are very important, and they are, in some respects, our lifeblood. But I want to draw your attention to the fact that there is a much larger battle worldwide to be fought, and we are all part of that. When I was born, international law didn't recognize genocide, and international law didn't recognize crimes against humanity. And then, all in a rush, we had the Nuremberg trial, and those two crimes were recognized. And then we had the International Court of Justice, and then we had the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And on we went from there. In 1961, Amnesty International was formed. In 1978, Human Rights Watch was formed. And perhaps we reached a sort of pinnacle in 2002 with the formation of the International Criminal Court. Since about 2000, we've nosedived. And I'm going to make that point by doing a little bit of name dropping to you. They're all names you'll recognize. Trump, Putin, Netanyahu. Make no mistake about it, those people don't simply dislike the notion of human rights. They will do their utmost to destroy the human rights structures. I'm going to do a bit of name dropping beyond that, which will shame us all, and that is Starmer, Cooper, and Mahmood. Because, make no mistake about it, the assault on human rights in the UK is as serious as anything. We cannot afford to ignore it. Palestine. If you can pray, and whoever you pray to, pray that this fragile truce and peace holds against all the odds. But let us look forward and assume that that is the case. What is our task in the future? Well, we can then begin to work for the human rights of a whole nation. But atrocities on a grand scale have gone on. And what has the international community done about that? They've rubbished the reports of special rapporteurs of the United Nations. They are already attacking the institutions such as the ICJ. But it doesn't just stop there. We all know, don't we, that they have been arming Israel so that Israel can continue to carry out these atrocious attacks. So that brings me to the second part of our title, Activists Together in Wales. I think it must be obvious, must it not, that the task of combating these attacks on human rights is not something that Amnesty or PSC or Stop the War can manage on its own. We desperately need to find ways of working together to prop up human rights. So, by the end of the day, with your help, I hope and plan that we will have achieved three things. One, we have a splendid array of really good speakers covering a wide array of topics. We will go away better informed for the fight and energized for the fight. And from those speeches, there will be actions that we can take. So this is not, please, this is not just a talk shop. This is where we start work. And I hope we will have taken the first steps towards finding a way of working together to grow and defend human rights in Wales and the UK. Thank you very much indeed.
We've kind of presented this as a question because I think it's still very much something that is being debated, how much we involve children in protecting, promoting and learning about human rights. For the first time ever, we are told that we must include the teaching of human rights in education. This actually became law in 2011 in Wales as part of domestic law. So the convention was actually adopted as part of the fabric of the legislature in Wales. Teachers are told, are directed, they must actually be teaching it. The good news is that they are actually doing it, and some are doing it brilliantly. But there is a lack of knowledge and perhaps sometimes a lack of direction which does need to be addressed. But there are also people here who we've talked to who are deeply frustrated by the lack of response from schools in allowing people like Amnesty International or the Refugee Council and so on to go in and talk about current issues. It is a problem, and overcoming that problem is one of the things that we want to focus on.
I'm currently doing some work on children's rights and the application of children's rights in schools, and I'd like to just share a little bit about that and really consider some of the hurdles that are there to prevent children's rights from actually being implemented within schools. There are a number of things that have happened in Wales which actually places children's rights at the centre of the education system. So we have the Curriculum and Assessment Act, which, as you can see, a duty to promote knowledge of the Convention on Children's Rights and the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And we've also have, prior to that, the Rights of Children and Young People Wales. So that is the first act that has been implemented in the UK, which is directly related to the rights of children and embedding the convention into Welsh law. If you look at the details of the curriculum, it suggests that the work around human rights applies in three ways in terms of education. Learning about human rights, learning through human rights, and learning for human rights. And when we stop and think about what they actually mean, it is actually quite helpful. It's learning the facts about rights through the education system, but then learning through rights. The education system should promote those rights as a means of operation, as a pedagogy. And that should lead to that outcome that we're learning for human rights. That the children then are not only experiencing the rights within their education, but then they are equipped then to employ those beyond their education. In terms of the content of education, if you speak to teachers, and Halima suggested there that a number of you are maybe getting frustrated with the difficulties of getting into schools. What are the reasons for that? Part of the reason is that we're living in, even though the curriculum for Wales has been changing very recently, it has a legacy of the old national curriculum from 1988, which is very prescribed, very full, very overloaded. So actually getting teachers and schools to think about anything apart from what is directly in front of their faces is incredibly difficult because of the nature of the curriculum, because of the nature of education at the moment. And then there are issues in terms of relations between children and adults. If you think about it, children spend most of their childhood in schools, and yet it is the place where they have least say about what happens to them. In what way does that enable them to develop their advocacy skills, their agency as individuals, where they have very little say in terms of what happens? And to what extent do they have a voice?
So I grew up in Australia, and in my mother I had someone who had come from a very broken background, but had been that person in her generation that had said, she was going to change the script, and she was someone who raised us in a household that always had conversations about fairness and justice and how we treated others. In my dad, I had someone who had grown up in a small farming town in southern Australia and was closely connected to how we did the work of building a community, looking after our neighbours. For me, as a young guy, I started to get interested in the issue of climate change and environmental sciences, and felt that these were issues that connected to those kind of principles I'd learnt of justice and how we treat our neighbours. I was studying this at university, and it's the time where I really found my calling and the work I wanted to be involved in. And it came to life for me when I met a young man called Iso Nime, who was visiting Australia from his home of Vanuatu. And he was looking down the barrel at the devastating impacts that would be happening to his land, his community, his culture, as sea levels rise and as they faced more severe cyclones. That really took this theoretical issue of climate justice for me and made it very, very real and personal, befriending Iso and learning about what it meant for his life and the life of so many other people in our region, a region that Australia refers to as its neighbours, but we were being a very bad neighbour when it came to climate justice. It went a step further. I then learnt that our university, the Australian National University, was complicit in this problem. The ANU, whilst being a leader on climate science and policy, was also investing in many of the worst fossil fuel companies in Australia, companies that had major expansion plans. So we launched a campaign, one of the first on the planet, to get the ANU to divest from fossil fuels. And over the next 3 or 4 years, we did so many different forms of organising, conversations, action, protest, research, to get the university to shift. And they blocked us at every stage. But we built a very powerful and influential movement. And there were many twists and turns in that campaign, but we did eventually win. We got the university to divest from most major fossil fuel companies. Great, thank you. That experience cemented my belief in the power of youth activism and in the importance of our universities as a space of exploring ideas, challenging authority, and creating change. And so it's been pretty alarming to see what has been playing out across campuses in the UK, but also back in Australia, in the United States and elsewhere over the past couple of years in response to students standing up against the genocide in Gaza. But it is very clear that this is part of not just isolated one-off incidents, but a broader chilling effect that is playing out across UK campuses and wider UK society. We've seen for a long time the way that prevent has been used as a measure to intimidate and quiet people from speaking out on issues they are passionate about, political issues, and in particular the targeting of minoritized communities. Just last week we saw the Prime Minister coming out and saying that it was un-British for students to protest on the 7th of October. Also last week it was revealed through research by Liberty Investigates that at least 3 universities have been offering to surveil students on behalf of arms companies that are wanting to do stores and freshers engagement on those universities. So as I mentioned, Amnesty is doing a detailed report into this problem. That report will be released early next year. The exact findings are still being refined and going through all the checks, but we're not going to allow it to just be something that we investigate and report on and speak about. We are going to work as a movement to turn things around. And over the last few months in the Amnesty Youth team, we've been speaking with a number of student leaders from our 63 campus groups, now 64 thanks to the formation of the group here, and partners such as Liberty and Cage to build a campaign that will turn this around. So in a nutshell, the campaign will be about winning on university campuses a commitment from the Chancellor, the Vice Chancellor, the Board, to a charter of free expression, a charter of defending dissent, which will have like key principles, those key rights that should be protected on any university campus. We will be working with student activists to build broad coalitions, so bringing together all the different groups, societies, academics, and then community members who care about free expression and assembly to all sign on in support of this freedom of expression charter, and then building bottom-up pressure within the university structures to get it eventually signed off and approved at the highest levels, but working through student unions, student senates, university senates, etc., to build a kind of groundswell of support for this charter. And as I've already said, like, that this will not just be something that university amnesty societies are doing, but that there'll be broad coalitions being built, so that we're not just speaking to our usual bubbles, but we're engaging with a much wider constituency. So in terms of how we will actually win, we've drawn from the experience of campaigns like the divestment movement and a lot of the successful work that's been done for Palestine Solidarity and other university movements. And I guess the key ingredients we're looking to build is, firstly, that this is a high-profile national campaign. So Amnesty UK doing this report, launching it with our partners, will help give it that energy. We'll be training students in how to have conversations with a whole diversity of people on their campuses to build those broad coalitions. We'll also be helping students run trainings and workshops for them to understand what their rights are and how to protect their rights, stand up for each other, even before those universities have put in place the reforms that we want to see. We'll support them to take coordinated, tactical, visible action, so that we, as we build these coalitions, then make sure the university decision makers cannot ignore it. We'll keep pressuring them till the charter is signed. And then critically, it's not just about a symbolic signing of a charter, it's then the follow through to make sure those policies and recommendations are implemented. In terms of how everyone here could help out in this incredibly important Defend Dissent campaign, firstly, I think we've already ticked this box, but students can help start or revive the Amnesty Society on their campus. For everyone else here, if you are connected to young people who are at university or have other connections into the university space, be it academic circles or other parts of university governance, I would love to have a conversation, get those contact details and work out how we can be in touch with the people you know, help them get involved in this campaign. And then we're really interested for this to become an area where student groups and Amnesty local groups can collaborate. So where there is a local group near a campus looking to build connections between the two, so that there can be mutual support and campaigning on this issue. Because this is about more than really just what happens on campuses. It's something that affects us all. And we also know from many years of campus campaigning that universities are good at waiting down the clock for, say, the holiday break, when many students go home and all the momentum can fade away. If we had partnerships with local groups, it would mean that we maybe have a kind of base of energy that can continue in those fallow periods, so that we really continue the momentum in these campaigns. But yes, please, on any of those points, do come and have a conversation over the lunch break. I'll also stick around at the end of the day. Would love to get connected and look at how we can collaborate. I also did want to say that as part of my role, I also support our work with Amnesty Schools, Amnesty Youth Groups, which we are very focused on rebuilding over the coming year. So I was already kind of taking note of some of the conversation that happened in the last session about possible ideas and collaborations. Would love to connect, love to hear your thoughts, and look at how we can learn from what is working well here in Wales.
So, in terms of AI UK's Amnesty's priorities for the next Welsh Government, our big ask is a human rights bill for Wales. And the purpose of that is to incorporate human rights treaties into Welsh law. And that's the Covenant on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights, elimination of discrimination against women, elimination of racial discrimination, children's rights, and the rights of disabled people. And we want to make these treaties binding on Welsh ministers and public authorities in the exercise of their devolved function, so that they can be enforced by a court or tribunal. We know, for example, in Wales we have the rights of children, and ministers have to have due regard for their rights. But ultimately, if their rights are breached, children do not have a means of having that redressed through the courts, and that's what we want to see. And it'll make it easier for people in Wales to understand their rights and claim their rights, and also improve monitoring and accountability. You know, Amnesty's power is in this room, frankly, right? It's our activists, and what differentiates us, I think, from other organisations operating in Wales, because in many ways Welsh democracy is very, very young. There is not a huge amount of political campaigning of stunts. There is almost, in some ways, a cosy consensus. People sit in Cathays Park having conversations. I've been one of them for 15 years, having conversation with civil servants, with ministers, where everybody agrees on what needs to happen. And we leave the room, and lo and behold, things don't progress as they ought to. So really what we need to be doing is keeping public pressure on parties, on candidates throughout this, and to be thinking, what I want us to do is to think much more creatively about how we can bring the sort of stunts that Amnesty is so famous for to Welsh politics, to start putting public pressure to really make noise behind the cause that we're making on the Welsh Government. So we'll continue to develop the relationships that we need, but what I also want to ask of everybody is that we develop relationships not just in the Senedd, but in our communities across Wales. We also really need to work jointly and broadly, and I think this is a brilliant example today of us doing just that. This is much bigger than Amnesty. We're activists together in Wales fighting for human rights. And if we look across the landscape in Wales, right, we've got lots of children's charities doing an excellent job of fighting for children's rights, right? We've got lots of housing organisations doing a brilliant job on the right to adequate housing. We've got women's rights organisations and disabled people's rights organisations, but we don't necessarily have a space where we all come together and recognise the indivisibility of human rights. Because how can we have children's rights upheld if they don't have the right to adequate housing, right? How can disabled women have their rights as disabled people upheld if they're discriminated against as women, right? So we need to be able to create broad coalitions across all of these groups and organisations that are already working on this, and bring people together in support of human rights. And I think today is an excellent example of us doing just that.
It's a really big honor to be speaking to you today, and thank you so much, Hugo, for inviting me, and to the organizers for putting this together, and for all of you for being here. It's a bit strange to be talking about Palestine and Gaza right now. We're all carrying so much grief and so much rage around this. There is, of course, the kind of de-escalation of the intensive daily bombing, which is of course welcome, but it also means that the grief and rage of the last 2 years, we've had a moment for it to catch up with us. People are still pulling bodies out from under the rubble with their bare hands because the Israelis haven't allowed any of the heavy equipment in. They'd of course destroyed all of that equipment in the first month of the genocide. It's very emotional seeing our prisoners, our political captives being liberated. But there's still over 8,000 of them that we know about in the Israeli dungeons, and thousands more that are fate unknown, specifically from the Gaza Strip. Israel's onslaught against the West Bank has intensified immeasurably, actually, in the last 2 years. The Israelis have historically been extremely adept at using things from US presidential elections to football World Cups to other atrocities it's committing, smoke screens for other things it's doing elsewhere. Palestinian citizens of 1948 Palestine, or Palestinian citizens of Israel, have also been facing massive land confiscation, massive scales of arrests and political imprisonment, because 1948 Palestine is considered Israel proper, and so therefore not considered something that human rights organizations, for instance, will monitor and really talk about. And ultimately the core of our struggle, which is the return of refugees like myself to the homes and lands that we and our parents and our grandparents were displaced from, remains somehow at the very end of the international agenda, despite the centrality of refugee return to international law. And while we're talking about international law, I think what the last 2 years have shown more than anything is that the international legal regime is not robust enough to protect. Not only to prevent, but even once the commission of the crime of genocide was just on all of, in the field of vision of everybody who cared to look, it failed to stop it. The South African government's attempt to bring this to the International Court of Justice, for that to happen, required actually quite a bit of subterfuge on the part of the minister and her staff. And by any assessment for the International Court of Justice's decision-making to play out, we're not really going to hear anything before 2027. Right, this began, or this particular intensification of Israel's genocidal campaign against us of the last 80 years began 2 years ago, and we need to wait another 2 years before this court can even just make a determination on whether or not this was genocide. However, this is not really just about law. Right? This is ultimately, like all of the issues that we face, they are issues that concern power. The power to enact, the power to stop others from enacting. How do we build this power? How do we confront power? And on that level, we realize very clearly that this was not just Israel's war. Right? This is not just the Zionist project telling us what it said it was going to do from its inception in the 1880s and 1890s, which is to create a land for one exclusive kind of people at the expense of all of the people who already live there. Right? And chose a piece of land that really does belong to all of humanity in so many ways, and has forever, as a crossroads between continents, as a place that is holy to so many. So to say this is only for this one kind of people and everybody else out at any cost has been the history of the Zionist project. That is the Zionist project. The expulsion of the indigenous population and its replacement by one kind of people defined under Israeli law as the Jewish people. Right? And even if that includes hundreds of thousands of Russian Orthodox folk who came after the dissolution of the Soviet Union and marked themselves down as Jewish and are classified under Israeli law as Jewish nationals of the Israeli state, it's really not about religion. Right? This is a separate colony. It is a genocidal separate colony. And what this has shown us in terms of power is that this is a global story. Right? This is not just about one place. This is also not something that's just happening over there. What, if any careful analysis of the history of Israel from before its inception until tomorrow and the day after, is that this is an extremely frail body. The only reason it is able to do what it has done for the last 80 plus years is because of international support, not complicity, not aiding and abetting, participation and active support, to the tune of billions and billions and billions of dollars per year from the date of its inception and before. Right? This miracle nation, startup nation, the greatest army, the greatest intelligence service, all the stuff they feed us on Hollywood and television or whatnot, is really all quite nonsense, right? If we want to learn one lesson from October 2nd, it's that a group of people who were living in a concentration camp for over a decade were able to break this greatest military in the world. Using effectively homemade munitions. And the international community, the state system, has doubled down, right? Not a single state has really taken any meaningful action to hold Israel to account. 2 years into it, we started to get some support for members of Spanish and Italian society who were participating in flotillas as a kind of naval escort of one ship. That was basically as far as we got in terms of state activity, other than the rogue South African minister who brought this to the International Court of Justice. Nobody's managed to bring any food or water or aid in the middle of a forced famine and starvation that was happening in front of all of us. And it's also set a precedent. Right? Some of you will remember about a year and a half ago, India and Pakistan looked like they might be going to some conflict over Kashmir. And hopefully the first thought in everybody's mind was, uh-oh, Israel set the precedent, what is India going to do in Kashmir? Because they're going to be able to get away with it. Right? Are they going to be able to carry out mass genocide in front of all of us and then say, well, you can't hold me to account. Israel did it and nobody lifted a finger. On what basis are you going to be hypocrites and lift a finger against me? We've been told, point blank effectively, that these regimes that we live under, I'm now talking about the British government and the American government and the German government and so on, would rather violate their own citizens' rights, would rather turn themselves into surveillance states, would rather violate their own constitutions to allow things like arms companies, like we heard this morning, to spy on students. Not even state surveillance systems and intelligence apparatuses, to allow private arms companies to spy on students at universities, then to stop a genocide. Let it sink in where we are right now as a globe. And so really this is what Palestine is, this struggle that we've been dealing with for the last 2 years is not something that's localized in Palestine. This is about the ascendancy of global fascism. And the sooner we reckon with that fact, the sooner we realize that the struggle for Palestine is not a struggle that's happening over there, it's a struggle that's happening right here. Every conversation we had this morning ties in very directly to this exact fact, that fascism is here. It's not coming, it's not on the way, it's not something we need to watch out for. It's here. It's this government, it's the Labour government, the government led by a party that's supposed to represent the British working class. And I think we need to point to the fact that there is a restructuring of the British working class towards turning the British working class into people who make weapons, into policemen, and into prison guards. Maybe there's a clue here somewhere, right? That in the last 10 years, there has really been this restructuring, this shift of trying to funnel the working class. Instead of protecting things like the productive industries that this country had before, to go into the production of munitions and arms and airplanes that are going to be used to kill people elsewhere, and perhaps not just elsewhere. So that the working class itself is fully tied up to the prison-industrial complex and the military-industrial complex. So it's the weaponization of unemployment and the weaponization of productive employment to buttress the intensification and the kind of rootedness of fascism in this society. And I think one of the things that we need to learn, and this comes up whenever I'm in a conversation where kind of human rights and the law and these sort of formal layer, liberal layer of the conversation is the focus, is that I think our liberal theories of change need to be rethought, right? And I will be the first to own up to the fact that for the last 25 years as a political organizer, my theory of change was that everybody is misinformed about Palestine. If only people knew more, then we can have a mass movement, and we would have people in the streets and people demanding different policies from their representatives. In the last 2 years, we saw exactly that. Who doesn't know about Palestine now? How many millions of people were in the street every single week? Every political organizer I know, pre-2023, their dream was millions of people in the streets every week. But that's how change happens. We got millions of people out in the street. There's still millions of people out in the street. And not just in London, or in Cardiff, or in Edinburgh, or in Birmingham. Globally, this is the largest mass movement in human history. We've broken all the records in terms of mass movements. And not only did nothing change, 2 months ago the British government announced it was paying Israel £2 billion to get the Israeli Defense Forces to train British soldiers and police. They're upping the ante, they're upping the game into the genocide, into the mass movement, into the millions of people out into the streets. There's something we're not doing right? And this is not a self-flagellation. This is we must take stock. Our theory of change, which is about informing people, and they will come together, and they will head out into the streets, and they will put pressure on our representative institutions, this is not doing it. If that was an effective theory of change, then December 2023, January 2024, the genocide would have stopped. And I'm not saying I have the answers, but I am saying that fascism has something to do with it, right? Fascism in the sense of a kind of authoritarian regimes, and what differentiates fascism from other types of authoritarianisms, do we know? It's that fascists win elections. That is the single most important difference between generally authoritarianism in general and fascism in particular. That fascism wins elections. Right? It's a populist type of authoritarianism. It has a support base, and a very large support base. And we have to contend with that, because what we're talking about is something closer to the realm of civil war, right? And I'm not saying there's going to be people out with guns fighting one another tomorrow in the streets of Cardiff, but I am saying that we need to clue in that this is no longer about winning the argument, this is no longer about convincing people. We do need to talk to people, we do need to kind of reel people back from the edge of the cliff, but we do need to adjust our theory of change. It's made evident, the old adage, scratch a liberal and a Nazi bleeds. Right? You know what I mean by that? These institutions, these frameworks that we're living under, are all fine and dandy in terms of the language of human rights and due process and the rule of law and all of this, but as soon as they find themselves under threat, will immediately remove the mask, and the fascist monster beneath, we start to see those fangs. Right? And that is literally the moment that we're living in right now, is the unmasking of that liberal order and the appearance of those fangs, to the tune of hundreds of thousands of people dead. And so, I'll just end with this. I think Gaza's lesson to the world about freedom is the kind of thing where you use it or you lose it. And we have freedom still in this country. You have freedom. We're here, we're talking. I'm an immigrant. They can deport me tomorrow. Actually, they're deporting me quite soon. But the reality is we're able to have these conversations. We're able to hold placards and stand outside, right? Yes, they are arresting people, but they're sheepish as they do it. I mean, you all know all of this. But we still have the freedom to speak, we have the freedom to organize, we have the freedom to assemble, we have the freedom to develop our analysis, we have the freedom to hold people to account, we have the freedom to go and stop arms shipments and arms factories from sending those arms. We have all of these freedoms. They are still there, right? There are still courts that are able to overturn things. Pal Action 1, its last, the fact that the judicial review is going to go ahead. That happened yesterday or 2 days ago, right? There is still some of this here. Let's use it, or we're going to lose it. I'll stop with that.
Just as to sort of sound you all out, there's been a general small feeling of carnival today, even though we've had some pretty horrendous things to listen to. Should we organise an event like this again? Yes. Didn't hear many no's. So goodbye, thank you, and have a safe journey home.